My mother had been in the ground less than 3 hours when my sister-in-law cornered me under a black umbrella and told me to start packing for the cheapest care facility she could find. It was the worst day of my life, and I was still standing at the edge of the grave of the woman I had shared 43 years with. I didn't argue. I just got into my neighbor Harold's battered work van, assuming he was driving me home. Instead, he took me to an empty storage facility on the edge of Columbus. Harold pressed a heavy iron key into my palm and spoke low. "Eleanor came to me 6 weeks ago," he said. "She said if she didn't make it through the year, I was to bring you here right after the service. She made me swear not to breathe a word to Douglas until you knew everything." My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the rusted door and pushed it open. The lights buzzed to life, and the room inside was nothing like a storage unit. Every wall was lined with corkboard, covered in bank statements, contracts, printed messages, surveillance shots, and handwritten notes tied together with string. Pinned at the center of it all was a photograph of my daughter-in-law, Marlene. I couldn't breathe. My soft-spoken wife, the woman who spent her retirement making casseroles and quilting for the neighborhood kids, had quietly assembled an entire case file. On a folding table sat a small tape recorder with my name taped to the side. I pressed play, and Eleanor's tired but firm voice filled the space. "Walter," she said, "if you're hearing this, I'm already gone. I didn't tell you sooner because I wanted my last months to be about us, not about criminals. Marlene isn't helping Douglas grow his business. She's been siphoning off his software patent into a shell company run by her boyfriend, Roland Kessler. And she's planning to have you declared unfit so she can take the house and everything in our accounts." Those words nearly broke me. Douglas was my only child, and I had walked away from my career as a lead fraud examiner for the State Treasury Department to nurse him through a childhood illness. For years, the world had known me only as a retired mailman. But long before that, I had been one of the sharpest financial investigators in state government. Someone who could trace dirty money through a maze of fake companies without blinking. Eleanor had never forgotten that version of me, even when everyone else had. When I got back to the house, Marlene was outside my study, hammering the lock off the door with a mallet. She spun around when she heard my footsteps and instantly switched into tears and panic. When Douglas got home that night, she told him I had shoved her and tried to break into the room myself. My son, worn down by grief and just wanting the fighting to stop, took her word for it. Marlene pulled out power of attorney paperwork and pushed Douglas to get me to sign it so they could manage things for me. I played along, letting my hands tremble and my voice waver as I put my name on the page. Marlene watched with a satisfied smirk, thinking she'd just secured the house, the savings, and my future. What she didn't realize was that I'd used a fading ink pen left over from my old investigative days. By the next morning, every signature would vanish and the documents would be worthless. That night, once the house went quiet, I opened a steel case I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were old burner phones, an encrypted laptop, and a handful of tools from my former life. I called Denise, a former colleague from the department, and asked her to dig into Roland Kessler and his company, Fenwick Capital Partners. By sunrise, we had confirmation. Marlene had taken out loans under Douglas's name and funneled the cash straight into Roland's failing investment fund. To get closer, I dressed as a maintenance worker and slipped into Roland's office building. I planted a small audio device under his desk and left without anyone noticing. That evening, sitting in my truck, I listened as Roland and his attorney worked out the final details of transferring Douglas's patent. Then Marlene called in on speaker. She bragged that she'd already gotten my signature on the paperwork and was ready to ship me off to a facility while she cleaned out my accounts. Every word of it was recorded. The next day, Marlene showed up at the house with a lawyer she'd hired to catalog my belongings. She mocked Eleanor's china collection and old photo albums, calling them junk to sell off. I served them both coffee while hidden cameras caught the whole exchange. Then I asked Marlene, casually, "Is Roland actually going to give you that 40% stake he promised?" Her cup clattered against the saucer, and every ounce of color left her face. She knew, in that instant, that I had the one name she'd fought hardest to keep hidden. Still, I kept up the act of a confused old man. The uncertainty I'd planted made her sloppy. Meanwhile, Denise and I kept building the file. Loan documents, forged signatures, bank transfers, recordings, all of it tying Marlene and Roland to fraud, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy. We also discovered that Roland planned to unveil Douglas's stolen software patent at the Columbus Tech Forward Gala that Friday. The night of the gala, the ballroom was packed with investors, executives, city officials, and press. Roland took the stage and introduced the software as Fenwick Capital's newest innovation. Marlene stood near the front in a dark green gown, glowing like she'd already won. Douglas sat in the crowd, with no idea the new product being praised was his own life's work. As the applause started, I made my way toward the stage. Most people barely glanced twice at an old man in a plain gray suit. I took the microphone and introduced myself. "My name is Walter Combs," I said, keeping my voice level. "Before I was a mailman, I spent 2 decades as a lead fraud examiner for this state. Tonight I'm here to present evidence of fraud, intellectual property theft, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy." Behind me, the screens filled with wire transfers, shell company filings, forged documents, and surveillance stills. Then the recordings played. Marlene's voice rang out across the ballroom, laying out her plan to seize my assets and hand Douglas's patent to Roland. Roland's own words backed it all up. The room went dead silent. Douglas sat frozen, his face white with shock and grief. Then federal agents moved in through the crowd and up toward the stage. Roland was cuffed first. Marlene tried to slip out a side door, but agents caught her and read her the charges: fraud and conspiracy. Douglas stood still for a long moment, then walked toward me with tears running down his face. "Dad," he said, barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Your mother protected this family right up until her last breath," I told him. "Now it's on us to protect what she left behind." In the months after, Douglas got his patent and his company back. The fraudulent loans were traced back to Marlene, and the stolen money was recovered through the courts. These days, I still sit on my porch every morning with my coffee, thinking about Eleanor. She saw the danger long before I did, and she spent her last months quietly building the case that saved this family. Her final words to me were simple: show her how wrong she is. I did. And in doing it, I realized that even after all those quiet years, the investigator in me had never really gone away.